Good afternoon, everyone. This is Mike Kochman. Thank you for joining us today for this AGA webinar on navigating the Sunshine Law, preparing for the new era of transparency. I'm the chair of the AGA Regulatory Workgroup, as well as a professor of medicine in the gastroenterology division at the University of Pennsylvania Health System, and I also serve as vice chair of medicine for clinical services for the Department of Medicine. Today, I'm joined by Ms. Emily Graham, who is the Vice President of Regulatory Affairs for Hart Health Strategies, a consulting firm in Washington, D.C. Please note that we will be answering questions at the end of the presentation, but questions may be submitted any time during the slides by using the question pane on the right-hand side of your screen. Please note that this webinar is being recorded, and the webinar and question and answer period will be posted on the AGA website for future use. Before we begin the presentation, we would wish to review our disclosures. I have disclosures for Merck, Cook Medical, Covidien, which is formerly Barrix, Olympus, Dark Canyon Labs, and Boston Scientific. Emily has none. Today's program provides a forum for the open exchange and discussion of information about CMS's National Physician Payment Transparency Program. The AGA cannot guarantee that compliance with the information that we will present will prevent case review or will avoid any penalty, and disclaims any responsibility for non-compliance or penalties. This information that we will provide is intended for informational purposes only. At this time, I will turn the presentation over to Ms. Graham.
Thank you so much. And hi, and welcome, everybody. The agenda for today's call includes an overview of the Sunshine Law. We will also focus on reporting requirements for CME activities, which are continuing medical education activities, as well as medical research. We will discuss steps that you can take to prepare for this new era of transparency and the AGA's engagement in these efforts. We will conclude the call, as Dr. Kochman stated, by answering any questions that you may have regarding the program. In addition, any questions that are unanswered will be included as part of a frequently asked question document that will accompany this material on this presentation posted on the AGA website. So let's first start with an overview of the Sunshine Law. Why do we have to have a Sunshine Law? What is the purpose of this? As you know, collaboration among physicians, teaching hospitals, and industry manufacturers, which would be drug and device manufacturers, contribute to the design and delivery of life-saving drugs and devices. So collaboration is very important, and CMS does make note of this in its final regulations. However, while some collaboration is beneficial, payments from manufacturers to physicians and teaching hospitals or covered recipients can also introduce conflicts of interest, and this is where transparency comes in. The Sunshine Law is a resource for beneficiaries, consumers, and providers to better understand relationships between those covered recipients, physicians and teaching hospitals, and manufacturers or industry. The law aims to encourage transparency of reporting financial ties by industry. It will reveal the nature and extent of those relationships. It aims to reduce inappropriate influence on research, education, and clinical decision-making, as well as minimize risk of increased healthcare costs as a result of those potential inappropriate influences. So by way of background, the Sunshine provisions were included in Section 6002 of the Affordable Care Act, and subsequently CMS posted its final regulation called the Transparency Reports and Reporting of Physician Ownership or Investment Interest. This is also known as the Sunshine Rule. The final rule is expected to have an estimated cost of approximately $269 million in the first year and $180 million annually thereafter, most of which these costs would be absorbed by industry. So just a brief overview of what the Sunshine Law intends to do. Applicable manufacturers and applicable group purchasing organizations must report payment or other transfers of value to covered recipients. Applicable manufacturers and applicable GPOs must report, as part of this program, the name and address of covered recipients, the amount and the form of payment or the transfer value, the nature of that payment, of which there are approximately 16 categories, and the name of the covered drug or device to which the payment relates. It is important to note that the information that is reported is going to be made available on a public searchable website, which CMS has already begun work on and has included information on its website. The name of this site is Open Payments. So in terms of a timeline, it's important to keep some key dates in mind. Of course, on February 1st, that's when the Sunshine final rule was released by CMS. But then on August 1st, applicable manufacturers and applicable GPOs started collecting data on payments and transfers of value. And then starting on March 31st, 2014, that's the first time that data will be reported from the time period of August 1st, 2013 through the end of 2013, December 31st. And that information will be made public on September 30th of 2014. The first report to Congress regarding how this whole process goes the first year will be made available to the Congress on April 1st. So let's start talking about what are the definitions, the key definitions that you need to be aware of. So an applicable manufacturer would be any entity that fits into one of these criteria. It doesn't have to be both. It just has to be one or the other. So that would be engaged in production, preparation, propagation, compounding, or conversion of a covered drug, device, biological, or medical supply that operates in the United States, or is under common ownership with an entity described above, which provides assistance or support to such entity with respect to the production, preparation, propagation, compounding, conversion, marketing, promotion, sale, or distribution of a covered drug, device, or supply. What is an applicable GPO? Well, CMS's final rule defines that a group practicing or a group purchasing organization is any entity that operates in the U.S. or a territory or commonwealth of the U.S. and purchases, arranges for, or negotiates the purchase of a covered drug, device, biological, or medical supply, which would be covered products, for a group of individuals or entities and not solely for use by the entity itself. However, CMS did clarify that a GPO operating in the U.S. is one that has a physical location within the U.S. or in a territory, possession, or commonwealth of the U.S., or otherwise conducts activities within the United States or in a territory, possession, or commonwealth of the United States, either directly or through a legally authorized agent. CMS did not expand the definition of a GPO to include entities that purchase covered products in bulk only for use by commonly owned entities. So for example, when a hospital system were to purchase in bulk for its own use and for its own system and not for resale to other entities. CMS also clarified that the definition does not include rare and circumstantial resale of products in response to, for example, a drug shortage. Who are covered recipients? Covered recipients include doctors of medicine, osteopathy, dentists, podiatrists, optometrists, and chiropractors who are legally authorized to practice by the state in which they practice. This applies whether or not the physician is enrolled in the Medicare program or not, and it applies as long as the physician has a current license to practice. Now this is just slightly different for research payments, but we'll get into that in a bit. In addition, teaching hospitals are covered recipients, and CMS publishes a list of teaching hospitals annually. On October 1st, CMS actually published its first list of teaching hospitals, and that information can be found on CMS's Open Payments website. We can also provide that information to you as part of the frequently asked questions document and materials that are posted on the AGA website following this presentation. Other entities or individuals at physician or teaching hospitals' request or their behalf are considered covered recipients. However, there are some exclusions. Medical students are excluded. Medical residents are excluded. However, fellows are not excluded. Physicians who are employed by applicable manufacturers are excluded, and non-physician providers, such as allied health professionals, nurses, etc. These are all excluded. But again, it is important to point out that fellows are not excluded from this. They would be considered covered recipients. So what is a covered drug, device, biological, or a medical supply? That would be any drug, device, biological, or medical supply for which payment is available under the Social Security Act, under a state plan, or either separately or as part of a fee schedule payment or as part of a bundled payment, such as a drug or biological by law that requires a prescription, or a device by law that requires pre-market approval by the FDA or pre-market notification. There are some exclusions, including over-the-counter drugs and biologicals. And then, of course, there are several Class 1 devices and certain other Class 2 devices that would be exempt. And those would include things like tongue depressors and elastic bandages and Band-Aids and things of that nature. So what are the reporting thresholds? Well, applicable manufacturers and GPOs are going to collect data on all payments that are made to covered recipients, not just some payments, but all payments. And the reporting threshold requirements are payments or other transfers of value of $10 or more, so any item that's above that $10 threshold. Payments or other transfers of value that are less than $10, so long as the aggregate exceeds $100 in a calendar year. For subsequent calendar years, the reporting threshold will be adjusted based on the Consumer Price Index for the 12-month period. Now, given the fact that the regulation was released so much later than anticipated, CMS is going to maintain that $10 and $100, those $10 and $100 thresholds, but the CPI will be updated in June of 2014, and it will then change things for the future. So what items are subject to reporting? This is the list of items that are subject to reporting. I don't necessarily have to read each one of them, but relatively self-explanatory: cash, in-kind items, consulting fees, royalties and license, grants, etc. We'll just leave that up for a second so that way you can see. And what are the reporting exclusions? Well, buffet meals, snacks, soft drinks, coffee, things that are generally available to participants at a large-scale event such as DDW, those items would be excluded. Educational materials that benefit patients or are intended for patient use, those items are excluded. It's important to point out that things like textbooks and journal reprints are not considered for patient use, and those things would not be excluded. However, if you were to receive a poster or an anatomical model to use to help explain something to a patient, those items would be excluded. Indirect third-party CME monies, that would be excluded. Transfers solely for services for a civil or criminal action or an administrative proceeding, those items, that would be excluded. Publicly traded security or mutual funds, product samples are included, which was a pretty important item for many practices. Indirect payments, if the physician is unknown. Again, payments that are less than $10 unless the aggregate amount exceeds $100 per calendar year. In-kind charity care, discounts and rebates, items or services under a contractual warranty, and payments to a physician also licensed as a non-medical professional. So what's the difference between a direct payment and an indirect payment? Direct payments or other transfers of value are payments or transfers of value that are made by a manufacturer directly to a physician. So there's a direct payment being made. These are always reportable. There will never be an instance where a direct payment is not reportable. Indirect payments, on the other hand, are payments or other transfers of value that are made by a manufacturer to a physician through a third party, where the manufacturer requires, instructs, directs, or otherwise causes the third party to provide the payment or transfer of value in whole or in part to a physician. That would be the definition of an indirect payment. Generally speaking, direct and indirect payments are going to be reportable, but there are some exclusions when it comes to indirect payments. indirect payments may be excluded from the reporting requirements in some circumstances. So, for example, if a manufacturer provided an unrestricted grant to the American Gastroenterological Association to use at its discretion, and the AGA chose to use the donation to make grants to physicians, those grants would not constitute a reportable indirect payment because the manufacturer did not require, instruct, or direct the organization to use the donation for those grants. However, if a manufacturer provided funding to AGA earmarked for the purpose of funding awards or grants for physicians, the awards or grants would be considered indirect payments to covered recipients that are subject to the reporting requirements. So there's a bit of a distinction there. And it's important to pay attention to these different distinctions. Now, once something has been deemed to be reported and manufacturers begin reporting, what information are they going to actually be reporting? Well, of course, they are going to include their name. They'll include the covered recipient and what their name is as listed in the NPPDS database, including middle initials, what the physician's specialty is listed in the NPPDS, the primary business street address or practice location, the NPI number, the National Provider Identifier, and the state professional license number. In addition, the amount of the payment or other transfer of value will be included, the date of that payment or other transfer of value, the form of payment or other transfer of value, such as whether it was cash, was it an in-kind item or service, a stock or a stock option or other ownership interest investment, dividends, profits, or other return on investment. The nature of the payment, and we'll talk about those nature of payment categories. The name of the related drug, device, biological, or supply, which may include the NDC code, and for the devices and medical supplies, it will be the name under which it's marketed or the therapeutic area or product category. If it's a non-covered product or none, the one will be listed. Eligibility for delayed publication, and this would relate to medical research. The name of the entity that received the payment or other transfer of value if not provided to the covered recipient directly, so in the case of indirect payments. Payments or transfers of value to physician owners or investors, as well as additional context for the payment or other transfer of value. And this is an optional category. We do think, though, that manufacturers will include some context to better explain why there was a payment being made. And this is going to be something important for physicians to pay attention to, as well as teaching hospitals. So how does the Sunshine Law relate to continuing medical education? Well, it's important to note that accredited CME events that have been certified by CME accreditors, which would include the Accreditation Council on Continuing Medical Education, the ACCME, the American Osteopathic Association, or AOA, the American Academy of Family Physicians, and the American Medical Association. These groups have been deemed as accredited CME providers. AGA is accredited by the ACCME to provide CME and takes responsibility for the content, quality, and scientific integrity of its CMA activities. So the bottom line here is that accredited or certified CME events, including the Digestive Disease Week, are largely going to be exempt from the transparency reporting program, which is big news and good news for physicians. Now, when it comes to speaking at CME events, manufacturers are not required to report payments to speakers at accredited CME events so long as the manufacturers did not select the speakers, provide a list of potential speakers, or pay the speakers directly. That's where we wanted to make sure that that payments would not be reported. However, in the case of unaccredited or non-certified CME, if the payment or other transfer of value is made indirectly, it would be subject to the reporting requirements. So the bottom line here is direct payments or transfers of value, regardless of whether the CME event is accredited or unaccredited, must be reported. With respect to meals and snacks at CME events, meals in a group setting other than at conferences or in conferences at a large-scale setting If the per-person cost exceeds $10, applicable manufacturers must report the per-person cost of the food or beverage for physicians who attend the meal. Industry-sponsored dinners and lunches where attendance can be established, such as if you were to attend an evening event where you have tickets, those would be subject to reporting. The exclusion here is that food and beverage that's provided at conferences in settings where it would be difficult to establish the identities of the physicians partaking in the meal, that would be excluded. So, for example, if there were coffee or some other type of beverage or snacks in the exhibit hall and it's difficult to see who is actually, partaking in the snack, those items would not be reported. However, the important point here is that physicians who do not want to receive meals should make it clear to manufacturers that they do not accept them. Incidental items that are received during CMS has also got a lot of attention. Small payments or other transfers of value that are less than $10 do not need to be reported, except when the total annual value of payments or other transfers of value exceed $100. So if a manufacturer hands out an item above the $10 threshold during DDW or another AGA meeting, they must track and report who received the item since it is a more significant transfer. However, small incidental items, and CMS calls these out specifically in the rule, pens and notepads, that are provided at DDW or other AGA meetings or similar large-scale events would be exempt from the reporting requirements, including the need to track them for aggregation purposes. So if you're walking by a booth and you see a pen or a notepad or something very insignificant, you shouldn't be concerned. However, if the manufacturer provides a gift to a physician valued less than $10, such as a coffee mug or a flash drive, and those gifts would be tracked and potentially reportable should the aggregate amount of the gifts exceed $100. As you can imagine, DDW and the AGA are working closely with exhibitors to ensure that physicians are notified in advance that acceptance of the items above the threshold would be subject to reporting. So you won't be nabbed after the fact. You should know in advance that if you accept a particular item, it could be reported, or it could be subject to the reporting requirements, which may make a difference in the items that you decide to take. Now, when it comes to reporting requirements for medical research, there are a few nuances. Certain research payments or other transfers of value made to a covered recipient under a product research or development agreement may be delayed from publication on the website. And the final rule states that research is defined as a systematic investigation designed to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge relating broadly to public health, including behavioral or social science research. This term encompasses basic and applied research and product development. In addition, the final rule provides that if a payment falls within the research definition, it only needs to be subject to a written agreement or contract or a research protocol, which is important, and that the written agreement may be comprised of an unbroken chain of agreements that link the applicable manufacturer with the covered recipient. There's also a number of important definitions here. The clinical investigation is known as any experiment involving one or more human subjects or materials derived from human subjects in which a drug, device, biological, or medical supply is administered, dispensed, or used. We've already gone over the definition of research, but research payments would be all payments or other transfers of value made in connection with an activity that meets the definition of research. And again, it has to be subject to a written agreement, a research protocol, or both. So in terms of reporting research payments, applicable manufacturers will use a separate template, separate from the other templates that they will be using for reporting those other types of payments and transfers of value when it comes to reporting research payments. Research payments will be reported as a single interaction, and for physician-covered recipients paid by a third party, research payments will be listed separately from all other payments provided to the physician-covered recipient. For teaching hospitals, research payments will be listed separately from other payments to the hospital. So in terms of the reported information, the reported amount will include costs associated with patient care, time spent by professionals, and the provision of supplies or in-kind items. The total aggregate amount of research payments does not include payments for activities separate from the research, including payments for serving on a study steering committee or meals and travel, and they need not be itemized. The information that's actually going to be reported would include the name of the institution receiving the payment, even if it's not a covered recipient, the total amount of the research payment, the name of the study, the name of the related covered product, the principal investigator or investigators. The clinicaltrials.gov identifier would be optional, and context would be optional. Research payments are eligible for delayed publication in connection with research on or development of a new drug, device, biological, or medical supply, or a new application of an existing drug, device, biological, or medical supply. Clinical investigations regarding a new drug, device, biological, or medical supply would also be eligible for delayed publication. If a payment is eligible for delayed publication, it must be reported to CMS on the first reporting date following the year in which it occurs, and the applicable manufacturer must indicate on its research report to CMS whether a payment is eligible for the delay. And a little bit more on timing with respect to the delayed publication. CMS will not post the payment until the first annual publication date after the earlier of the following: the date of the FDA's approval, licensure, or clearance of the covered drug, device, biological, or medical supply, or 4 calendar years after the date the payment was made. Submitted information eligible for delayed publication will be considered confidential and will not be subject to disclosure under the FOIA, which is the Freedom of Information Act, until the date the information is posted to the website. One of the other important areas, particularly for physicians, is their opportunity to review and correct any inaccuracies. So CMS has allowed for a 45-day review and correction period, which will allow physicians to review and dispute information about payments and transfers of value reported by manufacturers before this information is made public on the website. CMS will communicate through its listserv, which providers can sign up for now on CMS's website. And again, we can include some of this information in the FAQ document that accompanies this presentation once it's posted on the AGA website. It's also available on the Open Payments website, and there will be information available so that way providers can log in and review their information. Manufacturers will have an additional 15 days following that 45-day review and correction period to correct data for purposes of resolving disputes. I think it's really important to point out that the sooner providers can sign up for open payments and go online and review that information and flag it when there is a dispute, the more time the manufacturer will be able to do its own due diligence and make corrections to that data before anything is made public. Because it's important to note that payments or other transfers of value that cannot be resolved by the end of the 15-day resolution period will be marked as disputed. However, the manufacturer's most recent attested data subject to dispute is what is going to be published. So again, it's really important that providers go online and check their reports as soon as they're made available to give the manufacturer as much time as possible to correct any inaccuracies. And here is just a nice graph just to show you the flow. CMS will use online posting in the listserv to notify providers that it's time for them to go online and that information has been made available. Physicians would need to log into the CMS Secure website to review the information. They should review it and dispute any inaccuracies before it's made to the public. And again, in the event that there is a dispute and the manufacturer can't correct it, it will be flagged as disputed, but that original attested information is going to be published. CMS's Open Payments website can be found using this link, which will be a hot link once you go onto the AGA's website and download this presentation later. But this is where you can also find a lot of other information about this new program. So the big question here is, are you ready? Is your practice ready? Are the physicians in the practice ready? Is the teaching hospital prepared? there are some important things that physicians and practices and teaching hospitals should be thinking of. The first and most important thing is to keep track of potentially reportable payments and transfers of value. While the onus is on industry to make these reports, of course, physicians would want to make sure that what is being reported about them is accurate, and the best way you can do that is to keep track on your own. So being diligent and keeping track of potentially reportable payments and transfers of value is the first and most important step. Also, reviewing and regularly updating your financial disclosures that you submit to employers, advisory bodies, and other institutions is important to ensure the accuracy of that data. Ensuring that the NPI information about you is updated and correct. It is also important that, that you download the Open Payments app, which you can get on an iPhone or through Google Play. There's a graph here, a graphic that shows you what the app looks like. There's some additional information using the hot link there that will instruct you on how to download this. But it's a really nice little tool that you can use on your smartphone, and you can start keeping track of things like lunches and small gifts that you receive. I think it's also important to note that this application, CMS cannot review the information that you're collecting. It's just for your purposes, and it's only viewable by you. The other thing, too, is that CMS is not going to use that to notify you of when information is available on the website. You would actually need to go online or follow the listserv or monitor the email communications about that. So with respect to the AGA's action on transparency, the AGA has been very active in engaging with the American Medical Association, other medical professional organizations to address cross-cutting issues that other physicians have had. The AGA has been collaborating with industry partners, as we mentioned earlier, to ensure that the processes consider GI concerns and needs. And the AGA staff and physicians will continue to address outstanding questions and clarifications with CMS staff. And now I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Kochman to add anything additional on the AGA's action with respect to transparency or any other information that may be worth sharing with the audience.
Thank you, Emily. At this time, we will open the webinar for questions. Again, if you have any questions, please type them in the pane at the right-hand side of your screen. Do we have any questions to begin?
We do. The first question is, are there penalties to industry for not reporting the data or for inaccurate reporting?
Yes, there are. Manufacturers that fail to report timely and accurately would be subject to pretty stiff civil money penalties. So yes, but it's important to note that physicians face no penalties. The onus is on industry to make these reports, but physicians have no responsibility for this. However, again, as we pointed out in the steps to prepare, it's important for physicians to make sure that they're collecting this information on their own and keeping track of it, so that way if there's an inaccuracy, they don't have any problems later when the information is made public.
Thank you. The next question is, what if a mid-level provider or an office staff member took a gift from a conference such as DDW? Is that reported through the physician?
No, I don't believe so, because they would not be considered a covered recipient. I think the only time that there could be a question is if a payment or transfer of value was intended for a physician, but it was redirected to that individual. But staff who are participating in a DDW event, walking the exhibit hall, and picking up a pen or some other small item, I couldn't imagine that being a problem.
Emily, sorry to ask for clarification on that. I believe, though, that if that office member, receptionist, or whomever is a family member of the physician, that would be reportable, though.
It could be, yes.
Okay, the next question is, what happens if you want to dispute data reported by a manufacturer and they refuse to make the changes? Is there anyone who can ultimately decide that?
So I believe the way CMS has it as we have asked as the medical community and the AGA that CMS create an opportunity so that when there is a dispute that the provider can provide its own context as to why this is disputed. I don't believe that CMS has come out with any type of a final answer, and I'm pretty sure that that is one of those ongoing gray areas, as many of these areas are gray for CMS, for manufacturers and physicians, because it's so new, and we're all just kind of fledgling along and learning about how this is actually going to work and play out.
Thank you. We've had several questions that are similar. If a company brings in lunch for staff and the doctors do not eat, are they required to still report the lunch amount under the providers?
That's a good question. I think that's probably one that I would like to make sure that I get it completely right before answering it. So we probably should include that as part of the FAQ. But I think there are some nuances there with that.
Thank you. Another question is, should we keep the receipts on all lunches?
I think receipts would be extremely helpful. One of the nice things about the Open Payments app that physicians can download onto their smartphone is, if I'm not mistaken, you have the ability to scan a picture or snap a picture of the receipt and include that information or that file as part of that particular event. So I would say it's important to do that and to keep those receipts to the extent that it's possible.
Thank you. Another question is, if a physician is paid for reviewing a particular website or some patient materials and providing input on them for a pharmaceutical company, is this reportable as well?
That would be like a consulting fee, so I believe so.
Another question, is there any idea yet how the larger companies will be reporting? For example, a company like Merck that has 3 or 4 different components of their company, are they going to be reporting under one entity, or would they be reporting under the different areas?
I believe that they would be reporting under just the one entity, but I do know that a number of the drug and device manufacturers have expressed some of their concerns and challenges because they have multiple divisions and they use multiple different types of identifiers within those divisions, that being able to go back and link up NPIs to these other identifiers continues to be a challenge. I know that AdvaMed, Pharma, Bio, and some of the other large trade groups that represent these different manufacturers are trying to work collaboratively to come up with some means by which they can make this as simple and easy for physicians as possible. They're very interested in collaborating with the provider community to make sure that it is simple and seamless, and that there aren't any problems.
Thank you. And then if you can provide a point of clarification, if a coffee per person is less than $10 per staff, is that reportable?
I don't believe that that would be reportable, although I think in the aggregate it could be. But I'm going to say no for now. But that's one of the things that we can make sure that we have complete clarification in the FAQ document that follows.
Another question, when lunches are being delivered to a practice, how would a physician know, or what's the best way for physicians to find out what the companies are considering as the cost per person? So
CMS has included some rules in terms of how these figures are made and how they attribute it, what the per person costs are. So I think it's a little bit gray because we obviously don't know what that amount is. So this is something that we can provide some better instruction on how a practice would want to make those decisions as part of our FAQ follow-up.
Okay, we have a question about the app that's available. There's an open payments app for physicians, and there's also an open payments mobile for industry. Do you believe that larger practices should sign up for both?
I don't think that the one for industry would make sense for physician practices. That is exclusively for industry to use. It was developed and designed for industry. I think what is important is if, for example, a physician were going out to lunch or dinner with a representative of a drug or device manufacturer, asking them, for example, did you download this particular app? Because one of the neat features about these apps is that you can create QR codes, which are those funny little black and white, they kind of look a little bit like a map, and you can share information smartphone to smartphone using these QR codes. So, for example, a physician that has downloaded the Open Payments app for themselves that has included information about themselves and created a profile, they can share that information at the time of the dinner or the lunch or the meal with that industry individual, so long as they've downloaded that app for industry. So I think it's smart to ask those types of questions when you're about to partake in some sort of a meal. But in terms of a large practice downloading the industry app, I wouldn't say that that's necessary.
Thank you. Some practices are experiencing when drug representatives bring lunch to the office, they're stating that they're not collecting data and that they will not collect data in the future. Would this, do you think, be an accurate statement, or should the doctors still be wary of potential reporting?
I would be wary of potential reporting, and I would probably make note of the fact that something had been brought in terms of a lunch. Thank you.
And then we have a question: who will be notified when the website is available? Will CMS email providers individually?
They won't be notifying providers individually, but they will make announcements on their listserv, and it will be widely published other ways through other media. I think it's smart for everybody who listens to this webinar to visit the Open Payments website and sign up for that listserv.
And that was our final question.
Okay, I'd like to conclude this webinar. I'd like to thank Emily and everyone for joining us today. This webinar was entitled Navigating the Sunshine Law, Preparing for the New Era of Transparency. The recording of this webinar will be available on www.gastro.org in the coming weeks. Please read the AGA Digest and other AGA publications to stay up to date on other aspects of the Sunshine Law, as well as other regulatory issues that are of interest to gastroenterology. Thank you.